Be sure to listen carefully for the things that we are talking today, for the main concepts of Ethereum. Let's get started. Ethereum, you've probably heard of it. It is the second largest cryptocurrency or even ecosystem in crypto, next to Bitcoin. But what is the difference and why Ethereum and Bitcoin exist together and all the rest of the blockchain? The difference is simple. While Bitcoin is just a currency and you can do no more than just transfer it, Ethereum was one of the pioneers of the blockchains with logics inside. What is important to know about Ethereum? That Ethereum is the only one blockchain and ecosystem of a significant size that actually performed transition from proof of work to proof of stake. So staking wasn't on Ethereum from the very beginning. From September 2022, Ethereum is now secured by proof of stake based consensus mechanism. But you probably heard of Ethereum staking before September 2022. To perform a transition of such a magnitude, significant preparations should be made. So Beacon Chain, also now known as Ethereum Consensus Layer, the chain where validators interact and reach consensus, was launched in very early 2021. And from that time till September 2022, validators on Ethereum work on the consensus layer, also known as Beacon Chain. And there is execution layer, previously known as Ethereum 1.0. So on execution layer, actual transactions and smart contracts live, while on the consensus layer, attestations and block proposals live. So validators operate on the consensus layer, and after that, this information is transitioned to the execution layer. So Ethereum at the moment consists of two blockchains, execution and consensus layer. And again, moving back to consensus, proof of stake is not the consensus mechanism itself. It's just the idea that you need to provide something as a stake, as the collateral, that will serve as a guarantee of your correct operation as a validator and might be a subject of a confiscation or penalty in case of rules violation. And actual consensus mechanisms have different forms. In Ethereum, the consensus mechanism is called Gasper. But there is no such a word, right? Right. Because this name is made out of two names. And the first one is LMD Ghost. It is the first and very significant part of Ethereum consensus mechanism. And it serves for the purpose of choosing the right fork. And this acronym can be read as latest message-driven greedy harvest observed sub-tree. Oh my God, so complicated. We will dive into it a bit later. And the second part is Casper FFG, Casper Friendly Finality Gadget. And this feature is pretty unique for Ethereum, since every blockchain should have the mechanism to choose forks, so validators should be able to select the version of the chain that they consider the right one. The finality or immutability is not guaranteed. Why? Because at any point in time, another version of the chain can be revealed that, according to the rules of the fork choice mechanism, will be treated as the most suitable one. That's why Ethereum has additional feature of finality that we will again discuss a bit later. So let's start with the fork choice and with the LMD Ghost. The main difference of Ethereum fork choice mechanism is that it utilizes not the longest chain principle, but the heaviest observed sub-tree. It effectively means that votes for the blocks are summed up for their ancestors. Let's look at this example. So we are at the block A, the latest block that we know of, and we are sure that it is the correct version is block A. And then we need to make a choice between the one fork like B, D, and G, and another two forks, C, E, or CF. In the traditional mechanisms where the longest chain wins, we will definitely make a choice to the BDG chain. But as you can see, there are less attestations here than in this subtree. And if we speak about proof of work blockchains, since mining of each new block is approximately the same resources, in a proof of stake, the situation is different. That's why we need to take into account attestation weights. And using this mechanism, starting from block A, we will look at block B and block C, and the sum of the votes for the block B is 40, while sum of the votes for the block C is 60, and then we will move to block C. And after that, repeat this process until we will reach the block that is the last one in the chain. That's how the greedy harvest observed subtree mechanism works. And latest message driven means that only last vote from the validator is taken into account. The second thing is Ethereum finality that is reached using Casper finality gadget or Casper FFG. And it is a pretty complicated thing from the inside, but what we need to know about finality is that finalized blocks and all his ancestors can never be changed or reordered. That's a cool feature, right? But it is important to know that network finality is not guaranteed on Ethereum. Why? Because to reach finality, at least 2/3 of validators should agree on the same version, on the same finalized block. While for the fork choice, there is no minimum requirement for the validators' votes. The more votes, the easier it is to choose the fork. But for the finality, there is a threshold of 2/3 of active validators in the validator set. So network finality is not guaranteed yet. It is not a common case that Ethereum so-called loses finality. Let's take a closer look on Ethereum nodes and validators. On Ethereum, actually, validators are not something independent. Validators need to be connected to the node, and the node itself is connected to the network and negotiate with the network. So validators utilize nodes, and many validators can be connected to one node. I mean, as many as you wish. There are no limitations, but it depends on the performance of the node. For sure, I don't think that one piece of software like an Ethereum node will be capable of running, let's say, tens of thousands of validators. But hundreds of validators is pretty well set up, and it has been battle tested for a while. Is it only one node? No, it is not. As we discussed before, Ethereum is made out of two blockchains, consensus layer and execution layer. For the proper setup of Ethereum nodes, you need to run two nodes, execution layer client and consensus layer client. Each one will be negotiating with the rest of the network, either execution layer part or consensus layer part, and consensus layer client will negotiate with execution layer client on local machine. And only after that, you can run a validator and connect it to the consensus layer client. So basic setup for Ethereum validation is comprised of three parts: execution layer client, consensus layer client, and validator client. And there is an optional part called MEV boost software. So what is MEV? Previously, in times of proof of work and mining, MEV has a meaning of minor extractable value. But since Ethereum transitioned to the proof of stake, and now it is called maximum extractable value. The simplest way to describe MEV is that MEV is extra tips that is paid by people who propose transactions, who are willing their transactions to be included inside the block, but either super fast or in the correct order. In this case, they are ready to pay extra, and they are doing so. If you want to know more about MEV, you can follow these two links. The first one to know more about concept of MEV in general, or the second one to know more about MEV boost itself. So, what are the duties of consensus layer node and validator? Actually, name validator is one of the worst choices for a name of a piece of a software on Ethereum. Why? Because validator does not actually validate anything. Both validation of blocks and selection of the fork is responsibility of the consensus layer node and not validator. And also consensus layer node for sure communicate with the rest of the network using Gossip protocol. While validator should be indeed connected to consensus layer node, he can be sure that the blocks are valid and the correct fork is chosen. And validator client itself is responsible for proposing blocks, for attesting chain state, and for reporting slashings. It is important to highlight that validator does not validate block and does not choose fork, but each consensus layer node in the network, even if there are no validators connected to this node, is responsible for validating block and selecting fork. That's very important. So let's dive deeper into the validator duties. And the first one is block proposing. Validators on Ethereum and many other proof-of-stake blockchains, they are selected to propose blocks, while on proof of work and with mining, participants compete with each other to be the first one to solve this mathematical problem and propose next block. On the proof of stake, the situation is different and the validators are assigned to prove blocks. Hence, they need to propose valid blocks and do it in time. And what is important to know is that on the consensus layer, the blocks are made out of two things. The first one is payload or actual transactions that should appear on the execution layer. And the second one is attestations. And these attestations are used for the reaching consensus on the consensus layer. Let's take a look at the attestations. But to look at it, we first need to start from two things. The first one is slot. Slot is a point in time with a fixed time frame. The distance between slots is 12 seconds. And slots are comprised into epoch of 32 slots. So each epoch on Ethereum is 32 slots. And the slots, they determine points in time when the next block should be proposed. So each epoch, all validator set, you can see them here, validators, they are split into 32 committees, and participants of each committee should submit attestation for the exact slot they are assigned. So each validator on Ethereum network should produce exactly one attestation per epoch, not per block, per epoch, per 32 slots or 32 blocks. Now let's take a closer look on the attestation itself. The attestation itself consists of three things. It is a head vote, it is a source vote, and target vote. Basically, all three of them are block hashes. And while the head vote is used for the fork choice, the source and targets votes are used for finality. So with the head vote, everything is pretty simple. The validator is assigned to submit attestation for, let's say, slot number 5 in epoch number n. That means that starting from slot 6 in this epoch, his attestation should be submitted, and the head vote in this attestation should contain the hash of the block that, from the point of view of validator, should be placed in the slot 5 for this epoch. And then these votes are aggregated, and based on these votes, the fork is chosen. With the source and targets votes for finality, the situation is a bit different. Source and target votes are submitted not for the slot that this validator is assigned to, but for the first slot in the epoch. And so the Ethereum is finalized epoch by epoch. So if you are if you are a validator Ethereum, you should produce attestation for epoch n. And that means that at this epoch, you should submit two votes. The first one will be target vote, and this vote will be related to the checkpoint n, so the very first slot in the epoch n, and you will say, okay, I think that this block should be in this slot. But why does two votes are needed? It is needed for the preliminary agreement. First of all, validators attest target, and they listen to the rest of the network and see, if there is an agreement on this or not. And if it is, on the second attestation, they submit the same vote, but not as target, as a source. And when 2/3 of the network voted for the same source, the checkpoint number n is treated as finalized. And that's how the finality thingy works, and that's one of the crucial duties of the validator. The second duty is sync committee participation. Since there are hundreds of thousands of validators on Ethereum, actually around 1 million today, it will be impossible to include all attestations from even 1 divided by 32 of them into each block. That's why votes are aggregated, actually head votes. This needed to allow light clients operation, specific type of a consensus layer node that mostly observes the network and not fully participate in the consensus and validate. So what we need to know about sync committee is that validators are chosen to participate in a sync committee, but they are chosen pretty rarely, like maybe once a year or maybe even once 2 years. Yet for this duty, they get extra rewards. And now let's take a look at rewards. As we know, the validator duties on the consensus layer is block proposals, attestation, sync committee participation, and the one that we haven't discussed yet, but we will a bit later, is slashing report. So block proposals is the thing that does not happen pretty frequently. Since on Ethereum, the validator stake is fixed, the maximum effective balance of a validator is 32 ETH and no more than that at the moment. It means that you cannot have like enormously large or significantly small validator. You can have validators only of a similar size. That's why the more validators on Ethereum network, the less chances to propose block your validator will get. In the current situation, one validator usually proposes from 2 to 3 blocks a year, maybe. That's why block proposals are not the main part of validator rewards. The same goes for the sync committee. Even though the sync committee rewards are high, and you need to take care of your validator if you know that he will be soon participating in a sync committee, that's not a common case, and it happens even rarer than block proposals. So the main rewards on the consensus layer come from attestation, since each validator should submit exactly one attestation per each epoch per 32 slots or approximately 7 minutes. That's why attestation is the most fruity part of the validator rewards. But what about slashing reporting? Why this thing is not on the diagram? Because slashing is unpredictable. And even when validator report slashing, like report fraud for another validator, it gets significant reward. You cannot predict if it will ever happen. But that's not the only part of rewards. Another part of validator rewards is execution layer rewards. Since previously miners were awarded with priority fees or tips that authors of the transactions added to their payments, when we switched from proof of work to proof of stake, this priority fees now goes to block proposals or validators. And also validators, if they're using MEV boost, they can get MEV rewards. But what is the total breakdown between priority fees and MEV? It might be so, or even so, because MEV is a lottery. You never know how much MEV will you get from this or that block. That's why we cannot predict how much MEV you will get. You can get either 0.01 ETH per block or, let's say, 100 ETH per block. It depends on the network situation and more other factors. To sum it up, validator rewards is made out of 2 types of rewards. Consensus layer rewards, they are pretty consistent, and if your validator is operating well, you can be sure that you will get this or that amount of rewards. Plus execution layer rewards. In the typical cases, they are like 1-to-2 ratio between execution rewards and consensus layer rewards. But exactly now, at this moment, when the activity on the Ethereum network is pretty low, execution layer rewards are lower. The tips are lower, MEV are lower. But in the typical case, they are like 30-70. Now let's speak about penalties. So on Ethereum, not unlike many other proof-of-stake blockchains, validator indeed can be penalized. Since both attestations and sync committee participation are crucial aspects, one for the consensus layer mechanism and the other one for the light client support and also consensus layer mechanism, if one of these duties are missed, then the validator is penalized. So the stake balance is reduced by the amount of penalty. And the third and the worst case scenario is slashing. First, let's start with the conditions. Validator is slashed in case of significant consensus rule violation. So missed attestation is somewhat consensus rule violation, but it can be caused not by malicious action or some bad behavior. It can be caused by power flows or internet connection flows or whatsoever. So only significant cases are considered. And the most common slashing case is double signature of a block proposal or attestation. Why it is a crucial violation? Because validators can propagate 2 different messages, let's say about attestation or block proposal, to the different parts of the network, effectively splitting the network and ruining the consensus mechanism. That's why double signature is treated as significant violation, and validators who committed double signature get slashed. Why it is important to know for you guys? Because The most typical case of a double signature appearance is when you have the same private key on two hardware or software setups to run a validator, and at some point in time, both of them become active. It means that eventually they will either produce different attestations or different block proposals, and that means that your validator will be slashed. So what are the consequences of slashing? Slashed validators are ejected from the validator set after the slashing period, which usually takes 36 days. Take note, they are not ejected immediately, and there are some reasons for it. During this period, they are subject of a slashing penalty. There are three types of slashing penalties. The first one, initial slashing penalty, also known as minimal slashing penalty, is 1 divided by 32 of the validator effective balance, and the max effective balance of 32 ETH. It is usually 1 ETH. Then there is a correlation penalty or midterm penalty, and this penalty might start from 0 ETH and go up to maximum effective balance, effectively burning all the stake of the validator, and missed attestation penalty during the whole slashing period. Given that in the most typical cases the correlation penalty is equal to 0 ETH, in the common case, slashing penalty will result in 1 plus something ETH. Again, you should keep it in mind that you definitely should avoid cases of slashing for your validator, since it will be first place ejected, and at the second place you will lose at least 1 plus something ETH. Let's take a look at the timeline of a slashing to understand what correlation penalty or midterm penalty means. So when slashing is detected, so one of the network participants actually observe two different messages signed by the same private key related to the same slot, let's say the same attestation or the same block proposal, they report slashing and the validator gets slashed. Immediately, the minimum penalty or initial slashing penalty is confiscated from the validator balance. After that, during the whole period of slashing, validator is still treated as a part of the validator set. Hence, he should submit attestations and block proposals, but the rest of the network will ignore his messages and he will get penalties for the missed attestations. And at the middle, the correlation penalty is calculated. Why it is needed? It is needed to prevent coordinated attacks on the network, since at the same block, there is a limited amount of slashings that can be reported. It means that in case of a significant attack on a network, let's say hundreds of thousands of validators getting slashed, it will require some time for all these slashings to be reported. By the middle of slashing, there is a significant chance that all of the attackers will be slashed, and then the midterm penalty will be calculated. And the more validators is getting slashed at the same time, the more the correlation penalty is. This thing is required to prevent coordinated attacks. In the cases of individual slashing, like probably you did something wrong with validator hardware or some provider did it wrong, there will be no midterm penalty or correlation penalty. Correlation penalty flips from 0 to 1 at the current number of validators, I think at approximately 10,000 simultaneous slashings. So, and the worst case scenario that Ethereum mainnet ever saw was 100 simultaneous slashings. So you shouldn't worry much about that, but you definitely should keep it in mind and never commit attacks on Ethereum network. And now it is time to run a validator when we know basics about the consensus layer mechanism. Let's take a closer look on the requirements on the validator, and you will dive a bit deeper into it on a workshop one. So for the vanilla solo staking, to run a validator, you need first to provide 32 ETH as the collateral, or also known as stake. Then you need Ethereum's validation setup, as we've learned before, made out of execution layer node, consensus layer node, and validator client, plus optional MEV boost. And for sure, hardware setup. So something like Intel Nuke like CPU, 16 gigs of RAM, and 2 terabytes SSD. And what is the most difficult part here? Right, 32 ETH. That's a hell ton of money. How can this issue be even solved? Can be solved with Lido community staking, even though this initiative and this module is still in development stages. We are thrilled to share some details with you. So with Lido community staking module, the collateral requirement or bond requirement will be as less as 4 ETH or maybe even lower. We will know it closer to the release date. And you will still need the same Ethereum setup. The only difference is that MEV boost is not optional. It is mandatory now, so that your validator will get block proposals only from non-censoring relays approved by the Lido DAO. And the hardware setup is again the same. But is it the only reason to join Lido CSM is that the collateral is lower? Actually not. First of all, community staking module will be permissionless. So anyone thinking that Lido is too centralized and there are too few node operators in Lido will be able to join Lido and become Lido node operator and change this situation. For sure, the bond will be lower than the vanilla solo staking and probably the majority of the competitors. MEV smoothing will be offered by default. As we've learned before, MEV is a lottery. You never know how much MEV you will get. And not to be sad about your validator not getting huge MEV, you can be sure that validating with Lido, any huge MEV block or any small MEV block will be evenly distributed between all the participants so that income from MEV will be relatively steady. For sure, validating with CSM will be easy. On the next part of the workshop, you will learn how to actually run a validator, and you will know that it is not like extremely simple. Yet there are some solutions like a dApp node or Sedge or other software that helps you to prepare this setup within several clicks or several console commands. And for sure, Lido CSM will offer this integration. And the last but not the least here is that validation with CSM with community staking module will be more profitable than solo staking, approximately 1.5 times more efficient. So not only lower collateral and lower entry barrier, but also higher rewards. And since the community staking module is still on the development stage, you can right now do your first step towards joining Lido community staking module, first on the testnet and then on the mainnet. For this, scan this QR code. It is the link to Galax, and then where you can mint yourself OAT that will grant you significant amount of points. And at the end of the day, these points will be used to let you enter community staking module across the first participants. And as usually, in If We Trust. And now it is time to move to the workshop part. And I'm passing the mic to Sam. Sam, here you go.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you for the insightful sharing. It's always interesting, and I'm always impressed by how the Ethereum network, especially the consensus mechanism, is designed. But let's get to the fun stuff, or the boring stuff, depending on how you think about it. My name is Samuel. I run Stakeosaurus, all the way based in sunny Singapore. So basically, I help people get started with their own home-based Ethereum validator nodes. And in doing so, I'm building a grassroots community. A few pre-set up, pre-workshop logistics for us to consider. The goal of this hands-on workshop is not to become a wizard instantly, because this requires practice. The goal of this workshop is for you guys to understand the key concepts of running a validator node, get a feel of working with the command line interface, and get a hands-on experience on the end-to-end workflow so that you know that this is possible with the resources on hand. You can practice with confidence and with motivation. Right, so how you guys work through this workshop is to open up this simple notebook. Right, you use it along the way. One thing to take note is try to copy and paste the commands from this guide that I've prepared as much as possible. Watch my steps, don't jump ahead before attempting on your own. If you face an error, check for typos and missteps as the first troubleshooting step on your own. If you're still stuck, feel free to post your questions on the chat. Aridian will be supporting me to help you guys troubleshoot. And there will be several checkpoints along the way that I will pause and wait for everyone else to catch up as well. So without further ado, let's dive right into the very first step, which is to prepare our Google Cloud account. So if anyone has not done this, just take 5 minutes to very quickly go through this. You only need your laptop on, sign up for Google Cloud account, log in, create a virtual machine, enable the Compute Engine API. Let's go on to the Google Cloud console itself. Right, I've already logged in. So go to this big blue button, go to console here, and you'll see this page. Once you're here, we will go ahead and create a virtual machine. This virtual machine will be acting as a proxy for your home-based Ethereum validator node in actual practice. So you can name it as anything you want. Choose the E2 instance. Now there's a million validators, soon to be a million validators. Let's create another one, no worries. All right, so you can keep the name as is, choose the E2 instance, choose standard 16 GB of memory, change the boot disk to Ubuntu operating system, choose the latest 22.04 AMD 64 version, change your boot disk to SSD persistent disk with 500 GB of storage space. Identity and API access, you guys shouldn't have to bother with it if it's a new account. And then firewall, just check the allow HTTP traffic and allow HTTPS traffic. And then once you're done, go ahead and hit create. Okay, so once you guys have created your instance, let's go ahead and SSH into your instance using the Google Cloud Console itself. So just click on this drop down here beside the SSH text and then open in browser window. All right, so you guys should see this thing here. And the very first thing we'll do once you're in your operating system is to run general updates. So just go ahead and copy the first command under prepare the operating system and paste it into the terminal of your instance. Shouldn't take too long. This general updates just make sure that we have the latest packages and dependencies that will be required when we are setting up our validator client, our consensus layer client, and execution layer client. Okay, if you see something pop up, just click OK, and then just navigate to OK using a tab button and then enter. Once your updates are done, next thing we'll do is to check that our timekeeping on the device, on the virtual machine, is active and in sync. So what you look for is this NTP service active output. If it's not active, if it's inactive, then you copy and paste the next line, which is to set the NTP service to turn on. So what this is doing is the recognition of time on your device is in sync with the rest of the Ethereum network. So the next thing we'll do is to create a swap space. A swap space is like a backup memory that is carved out from your SSD to serve as backup in case the load on your Ethereum validator node exceeds your 16 GB for some reason, and prevents out of memory errors, prevents your validator node from crashing, which means you will have to like resync from 3 days ago, which means it'll be down for 3 days and then suffer some attestation penalties.
Small question about the price of full setup on the Google Cloud.
Yes. Google Cloud is expensive. Let's just put it out there. It's one of the most expensive ones, but because they offer like, 6 nines of reliability, right? Now, what we're doing here, right, is to use Google Cloud as a platform for us to practice for free using their $300 worth of credits. You can get up to $600 worth of credit even. So for people who are entirely new to running Ethereum validator nodes, instead of investing and purchasing hardware that costs, 800 or 900 USD, in order to practice, we can practice for free. And in fact, the most cost efficient option you can have, right, is using something like this. So this is an Intel NUC device. It's enough to run most clients, except for maybe Aragon, right? It only requires an i5 Intel chip, very small form factor, very quiet, very low heat, costs 800 SGD, so around like 700 USD, 650 to 700 USD. So this is ideal for running a home-based validator node. But of course, if you prefer to host it on the cloud, Asner, OVH are great options as alternatives to Google Cloud. But for the purpose of this workshop, Google Cloud is just used as a free practice platform. I do have another guide that I think Sasha will share with you guys that it's a very detailed step-by-step on setting up your validator node in your own home. So copy this first four commands to create your swap space, 4 GB from your SSD onto a backup memory. Once you have done that, the next section will make your OS remember your swap space settings even after your device reboots itself. We'll just copy it in. There. You'll see a configuration file being opened. We'll scroll all the way down to the bottom, copy the next section, paste it in. And then to save and close the file, use Ctrl O, Enter, and then Ctrl X. Then let's check our swap space settings. So run htop. You'll see under SWP below the memory line, you'll see 4.00G, which means it's configured correctly. To exit, Ctrl C. Then let's do another check with 3-H. See memory and swap. Under the swap line, you see 4.0 gigabytes. Alright, so after you've prepared your operating system, you run general updates, timekeeping, you've configured a swap space. Now let's go ahead and secure the node machine. Because we are running very high stakes operations, we don't want just anyone to be able to access this device. So there are a few steps you have to do. One is to immediately disable remote password and root login. So for Google Cloud VMs, for most cloud providers, I think they do some of these by default. But let's still go ahead and run through these steps so that you know what to look for when you are configuring your home setups. So let's go ahead and open up the configuration file for the HHD. Scroll down to, you'll look for the first line, uncomment the authorized key files line. Scroll down. You'll see it somewhere here near the top. Remove the hash at the front. And then next thing we're going to look for is KBD interactive authentication, which is set to no by default. Password authentication is set no by default. Then we'll go down to permit root login. Let's remove it. Let's look for it. Yes, here. Then once again, to save and exit, Ctrl O, Enter, Ctrl X. Let's move on then. So now that we've changed the configuration file, we need to restart our SSHD. Go ahead and run this sudo systemctl restart SSHD. Now that that's done, we will configure our firewall rules. So in summary, we will deny all outgoing connections by default. We will only allow 3 types of incoming connections across 3 ports. Number 1 is your port 22, which is used for SSH. Port 30303 is used by your execution layer client to connect with other nodes. And port 9000 is used by your consensus layer client, which is to connect to other validator nodes. So let's go ahead and copy and paste this in. Alright, done. Once that's configured, we will enable the firewall and inspect the settings. So if you see a prompt, just press Y. And you see this nice little table summarizing your settings. So the only 3 ports that should be open will be 22, 30303, and 9000. One thing to note is that port 30303 and 9000 will be used by the execution layer and consensus layer client as mentioned. And even though these ports are open, it is not that much of a security risk because we will create dedicated user accounts without root access for these services. So that if somehow it gets compromised, it still doesn't now have root access to make major changes on your devices. Let's move on. So after firewall protection is set up, after you disable remote password and root login, what you do next is to set up something called a brute force protection. So even though SSH key is very difficult to brute force, but we want to make it even harder for potential attackers. So let's install something called fail to ban, which will restrict the amount of tries for a single IP to attempt to log into your device. So run sudo apt install -y fail to ban. All right. Then let's paste this configuration into this config file. We'll set the max retry to 5 times. Then Ctrl-O, enter Ctrl-X to save and exit. And then let's restart the fail to ban service. And the last security configuration that we're going to do is to enable automatic security updates. Eugene, I think you can ignore this KBD interactive authentication. It's set to no by default, but you should be able to find it. So to enable automatic security updates, once again, just have to install this software and configure it. So let's copy this for convenience. You open our configuration file. Just replace it with this content. Remove it slowly. Paste it in. Or enter Ctrl-X. This settings, what it does is that runs an automatic update once a day. It enables the unattended upgrades. You'll clean up unused dependencies once every 7 days. And the device will reboot itself to implement those updates every time it's triggered. And you can actually set the reboot time to whatever you want. So I've set it to 2 AM because I'm sleeping. So it's best time to run these unattended upgrades. So once you have saved this configuration file, let's go ahead and restart the unattended upgrade service. Sergey, you asked about the size of the fully synced node. On mainnet, that's around 1.5 terabytes, 1.1 to 1.5, depending on the client you're using. All right. Then let's go into configuring and setting up our execution layer client. In my example, we'll be using Nethermind. So first thing we'll do is to generate something called the JSON Web Token. This will allow your execution layer to communicate with your consensus layer client within the device securely. So let's run this. You shouldn't see any output. That's normal. It's expected. Then we will install the dependencies required for Nethermind, which is these 3 packages. Then the way to install Nethermind is to go into download the latest version. So I'll just show you how it looks like. Over here, you choose the latest version corresponding to your device type. For simplicity, you can go ahead and copy this whole chunk here, pasted it here for you guys. It'll take a little while, a few seconds. Right. And the output to look for is this line here, Nethermind blah 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 .zip : OK. And it's due to this last line that I'm running, which basically checks for the checksum, verifying the checksum of the downloaded file, so that you are sure that you're downloading the actual package that you intend to install and you're not subject to any man-in-the-middle attacks. Right? Once that's done, we'll unzip the Nethermind zip file that we just downloaded into a folder that we create called Nethermind. And then we will move this Nethermind folder into the user local bin location. Then we'll remove this file that we downloaded. Go ahead and do it. Right, done. Now we'll create a dedicated user to run the Nethermind service. This type of user don't have access to the root account. Then we'll create a folder to store all of the chain data, all of the execution layer data, and then we'll change the owner of this folder that we created to the Nethermind user. And now let's configure the Nethermind service. Just copy this whole chunk in first, and I'll walk through what we are telling it to do. O enter Control X. So these flags, all you have to care about are these few flags. It basically instructs the Nethermind service to run on the Gurley network, the testnet, using this folder that we just created as the data directory, using this file as the JSON web token, again to communicate with our consensus layer plan that we will be setting up later. We'll be running on snap mode, and these are just heuristics. You can think of it as this way. In actual practice, on the mainnet, it refers to the block where the Ethereum switched to from proof of work to proof of stake, if I'm not wrong. And then we are enabling the metrics flag for monitoring. Alright, so now that the configuration file is done, we will go ahead and reload the daemon and start the Nethermind service. Alright. If you see this active bracket running text and a green dot here, it means you're doing it right. If it's running well, let's go ahead and run the next section of code, which is to print out the journal logs of the Nethermind service. Just to make sure that there's no errors. Everyone to catch up. If no one has any troubles, let's move on to generating our validator key. So for this step, in actual practice, what we will use is something called an air-gap machine to generate your validator keys. So an air-gap machine is a device that has never been connected to the internet before. But of course, it doesn't mean that you have to buy an entirely new device. There are ways that you can do this that I will detail in the actual home staking guide itself that we'll share to you after. For the purpose of this practice session, we will just generate the validator key on your virtual machine on Google Cloud itself as a simulation of it being an air-gap machine. Just take note that it's highly recommended that you use an air-gap machine to do this step. So same thing as how you downloaded Nethermind. Just go to the latest releases. Find the file that corresponds to your device and OS, Linux AMD 64 in our case, right? Otherwise, you can just copy and paste from here. And same thing, right? We have to verify the checksum of the file that we are downloading. On this downloading of the validator key generation tool, as usual, we will always need to verify the files that we are downloading. Just go ahead and copy and paste this in. Right, let's see if I'm back in. I am back in, right. So let me just redo this step just to make sure I have downloaded the right files. Alright, so once again, just look out for this output, which says the file that you downloaded with an OK. Let's go ahead and unzip it. You should see this green deposit file here is executable. Right. And now we will run the deposit executable file itself. So there'll be a few flags to take note here. In first, so we'll be generating a new mnemonic, a new seed phrase. We will be generating one validator key on the Gurley network and the Ethereum 1 withdrawal address. For testnet on the Gurley network, we have to use this particular address. Otherwise, you have to procure 32 Gurley ETH yourself. So when you use this, we can tap into the ETH staker allocation when we make our deposit. But for mainnet, this should always be pointed to an address that you control completely. Press enter. Run it. So let's go ahead and it prompts us to confirm our withdrawal address. So let's go ahead and paste it back in. Choose the language of a mnemonic word list. I will choose 4 for English. Then create a password to encrypt your signing key source. Once that's done, you will see a list of 24 words being printed. It's your seed phrase. I'm sure you're familiar with this. In actual practice, you write this down offline on a piece of paper. Before you do this step, make sure all your webcam is turned off, microphones are turned off, your windows are closed, there's no one standing behind you, no way that you can be compromised, right? But for this practice session, we can just paste it in our notepad here, because we'll have to paste it back in to confirm. Right. So if you see an ASC2 picture of a rhino in success, it means you're doing things correctly. All right. So now your validator keys are generated. What you do now is to create a password file to capture the password that you entered during the key generation phase. Create a password that has the same name as your eStore, for example. Instead of a JSON extension, you have a plain text extension. Then in here, just put in your password. You guys will enter whatever password you used to generate your validator key earlier. And let's just check. It's created. Once again, ensure that this text file that you created has the same exact name as this JSON file, the keystore JSON file. So now what you have to do is to print out the deposit.json deposit data file. See this. Now I have a notepad, in the new tab, paste it, and then save it in the exact name of your deposit data JSON file onto your own working laptop. To make sure that you're saving it in a .json. Alright. Yes, Eugene, you should use this exact address only for this testnet, only for the girly testnet. On the mainnet, you have to point it to an Ethereum address that you completely control. Right. So now it's time to configure and install our consensus layer client, which we'll be using Taku for this session. The first thing we have to do is to install dependencies, which is the Java runtime environment. So once you guys are familiar with the basics, you're free to try out both the OBOL and SSV tooling to run what we call distributed validators. So same thing, I'm just going to show you one more time. To download Taku, just gotta go to the releases page, find the latest release that corresponds to your machine. Taking a while to load my site, copy these pre-written files, commands here. Once again, watch out for the checksum verification. Once it's okay, then unzip, move it to the user/local/bin directory. Alright, then we'll create a new user called Taku that is dedicated to running the Taku service. Similar to the Nethermind user, it does not have root access. Then we'll create a dedicated folder to store all the Taku related data. And we'll move our validator keys into this folder that we created and then change the owner of this folder to our new Taku user. Then now it's time to configure the consensus layer client service itself. This whole chunk here, just copy it and paste it in. Go through the configuration flags. Right, so similar to Nethermind, we are instructing Taku to run on the girly network. We are pointing to this folder that we just created as the data path to store all consensus layer data. The execution endpoint will be the local host at this 8551 port. We'll be using the JSON Web Token as the way to securely communicate with the execution layer client. The initial state flag here refers to something called a checkpoint sync, which enables your Taku client to sync almost instantly. Enable metrics for monitoring. I like to enable REST API so that I can in the future, configure redundant nodes from this beacon node setup. And then we have this builder endpoint flag, which will not actually be using this session, used for configuring MEV boost. Same with the next flag, to submit your validator to the builder registration network, and then have enable UPnP for the peer-to-peer communication. So once that's done, we set the daemon properly, yes, green dot, print out the logs case there are some errors. There'll be some warning, it shouldn't be an issue. Once that's done, this command here to restart itself if your device happens to auto shutdown or auto reset. Right, so let me show you something. When you print out the journal entries, you'll see this particular line. What you do, it's not that, it doesn't matter that much for this testnet, but on mainnet, since we have some time, right? What you do is to copy this part, go to your notepad. So you see this epoch here, or wait, slot. Not here, this slot. Go on to beacon chain. Make sure you're on the creator version, the testnet version. Basically what we have to check, right, is that slot root, the state root and the block root are the same as what's being published to the network, so that we are sure that we are syncing from the right chain and not a fake chain. Alright. So you have the block root here. You have to make sure that the block root and the state root has been printed out on your device itself, on your consensus layer client service. It's the same as what's printed here on the Explorer. So if it's the same, I can see that it's the same. Then now we'll configure the validator client service itself. So open up this configuration file. You should paste it into your notepad first, because we gotta make some edits. What we need to edit is this default fee recipient field. Just put it into your own address to your notepad. This whole thing back into your terminal. Okay, so the flags here, again, running on the Gurley network, using this directory that we created, dedicated for the Teku service directory to store your chain data. This validator keys instructs the validator client on where to find your validator keys, which we've moved into this folder earlier, if you recall. Yes, here. And pointing to the beacon node API endpoint, you can just ignore this and remove this if you want to in actual practice, because this is the default settings. I just want to show you like how it links to the beacon node itself between the validator client and the consensus layer client. The proposed default fee recipient is the address where you receive block rewards and MEV. This field here, you're free to like change it to anything you want. It basically leaves a fund signature permanently on chain whenever your validator proposes a block. And then this last flag is very interesting, something called doppelganger detection. So basically, whenever your validator client service starts up, it will deliberately miss few attestations while checking for the existence of the same validator signing keys already on chain. And it does detect an existing key on chain, it will refuse to start. So it protects you from a double signing slashing event. So I highly recommend always start your validator client with this. So now that that's done, let's go ahead and start our validator client service. See active bracket run correctly, and let's print out logs. So you can see it's performing doppelganger check. You do this for at least 3 to 4 epochs from my experience, or at least 15 minutes. So if it's running, what you do is just to enable it to auto restart if your device restarts itself. Alright, so now that it's running already, what we'll do is wait for your execution layer client and the consensus layer client to completely sync. Most likely, your execution layer client would take 3 days to 5 days to maybe a week to sync with the rest of the network on the mainnet. But for the testnet, for the Gerli testnet, it should take around 1.5 days. So what you do after that is how to deposit 32 Gerli ETH into your validator node. And the way to link your validator with your 32 ETH is through the deposit data.json file, you recall, that we saved on our laptop. So what you do is to join this Discord server here. You'll move you to the ETH Staker Discord. Then you scroll down to the Ship Gerli Validators channel. Check out the pinned messages. Some instructions here, some notes here. Right, so this is the address that we use and that we set our withdrawal address to, if you recall. So what you do is to type Ship Gerli deposit, get your own Ethereum wallet whitelisted. So what you do is click on this signer.is link, connect to your MetaMask wallet, and then you sign a transaction to prove that you own this wallet. And click on enter signature here. So if it's successful, you'll see this message that says you can now perform 2 cheap deposits on gerli.launchpad.cc. You need a small amount of Gerli ETH, which you can get from this link here. Faucet, do it directly. So just click on the faucet, click on Gerli. So once it's loaded, I hope yours didn't take as long as mine. Click on this Become a Validator button. There'll be a bunch of disclaimers that you have to read and click through. Right? All of these you can skip because you already set up your clients for both the execution layer and the consensus layer, and you've already generated your keys. And then you come to this page. This is where you need to drag and drop your deposit data.json file here. So you should see this tick here and continue. Then you connect to your MetaMask wallet that you whitelisted earlier. One validator, you can see you only need 0.0001 Gerli ETH. Check all these boxes. And before you approve the transaction, it's very important to verify you're not being phished. So you check the deposit contract address, 3 boxes to review the address. In the meantime, you can open up these 3 links on separate tabs so that you have at least 4 sources of confirmation before you make the very scary deposit of 32 ETH into your validator. Can we make our deposit? So when we make a deposit on MetaMask, this will be the final confirmation. Of course, if you're using a hardware wallet, then there'll be another confirmation. Right. So this is the most nerve-wracking part of the process. You know, sometimes you sort of wonder, oh no, did it really go through? Where's my ETH? Alright, so you can see that your deposit has been detected. It'll take around a day, 24 hours for it to be processed by the beacon chain. And then it will join the activation queue. I think it's 7 days that you have to wait. Oh, wow. Less than a day. It's the best time to spin up your own validator node. Never been a better time. Alright, so now we have completed the workshop. We have successfully set up Ethereum validator node on the testnet using Google Cloud, and then we can continue to practice for free. Feel free to destroy the instance, create a new instance, go through the whole process again until you're very familiar with it. Because if you're not familiar and you encounter edge cases or there's some slight changes in the environment variables, you start to panic, you start to have knee-jerk reactions, and then you start to take every advice from every single person you meet on Telegram or Discord, and sometimes they're out to scam you, sometimes they cause you to be slashed. So best way to observe is through education. And of course, you need to put in the practice to understand the concepts and the operations behind running your own validator node.
Again, guys, it was a great pleasure to be here today to share our knowledge about Ethereum staking with you, to practice on running the actual Ethereum validator with you. You are amazing. Hope to see you again. Do not forget to scan this QR code, and I'll see you guys later.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dmitry. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sasha, for helping in the organization and helping for the Lido, that they really care about the validation, about the decentralization, about how make the Web3 more decentralized. Of course, education is the most important in our days, because technology can be so cool as it possible, but if nobody understands it, if nobody know how to use this technology, even the best technology will be useless. So we're really glad that Lido spent the time for the education. And of course, thank you for all participants.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for all the participants. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, Vladimir. And hope to see you guys soon. If any one of you will be in Istanbul on DevConnect, it will be a great pleasure to see you in real life, to give you a huge hug, and to tell you more about community staking initiative and community staking module in particular.
Thank you all for the presentation. It was a good experience to learn more about Ethereum and how to run it and how does it actually work. It was really cool.